what is your understanding and history of the vegan diet and protein, briefly, and we'll get into questions.
Yeah, so all protein is not the same. Different proteins have different amino acid profiles. Different proteins have different things attached to them, like plant proteins have fiber and polyphenols. Animal proteins have saturated fat and cholesterol. So it's not just the protein. We don't just go around eating isolated protein everywhere with a balanced amino acid ratio that matches our human physiology requirements. That's not how it goes. We eat food. And when we eat food, you're getting everything else that comes along with that protein. So, one, to be clear, I, based on all the research that I've read, it is not protein per se that causes a reduction in longevity. It is the type of protein and specifically the type of amino acids and quantity of these specific amino acids. So they first started looking at the studies and said, all right, protein calorie restriction does cause an increase in lifespan. And that's across all species. That's true. All right. So that's a given. That's a known. They said, okay, well, is it all calories or is it some calories? So they restricted carbohydrate calories. It didn't change much. Same with fat. Didn't change much in longevity studies cross species. But when they restricted the protein, it did cause an increase in lifespan. And they're like, wow, so restricting protein increases lifespan. Yes, but when they looked at, okay, is it an actual increase of lifespan or is it an increase of a shortening of lifespan due to the type of protein and everything that comes with it? When they looked at that data, they found, okay, so what they did in this study is they increased the protein intake to over 200 grams per day, all right, which is considered high protein intake. Just for instance, I'm a natural bodybuilding champion and I never go over 100 hardly in a day, 100 grams in a day. So I can beat everybody on stage at 100 or slightly over grams of protein a day. If I can do that, if I can reach my maximum capacity for building muscle naturally without drugs, just by consuming plants at about 100 grams a day, there's no need for anything else that's
So
excess.
where's that your percentage wise? Like we said, 0.36, 0.5. What's yours? What do you try to reach?
Uh, Later studies have shown that it actually increasing protein can extend lifespan. And there's a different way of looking at that data. I'll get to the second. Let me talk
Okay,
about
okay.
the study. So when they looked at 200 grams in those that were eating plants at 200 grams, they didn't find much difference in disease states. No more difference in heart attack, stroke, diabetes, all the major cancer, all the major killers. But when they looked at the same 200 high protein intake when it's all animal based, they had a 75% increased risk of heart attacks. They had a 300% increased risk of cancer and a 500% increased risk of diabetes. So you can see the exact same amount of 200 grams of protein was causing vastly different outcomes in human beings. So it's not the protein or even the quantity of the protein, it's the type of protein, it's the source of the protein, but not only the source of the protein, it's what comes with it. All right. So the next thing they said, okay, it's plant protein versus animal protein. So what's different about the two proteins? And one of the key differences is a sulfur amino acid called methionine, methionine. It's a essential amino acid, so we need a little bit. But what happens when we get too much? We now know through both human interventional RCTs, randomized control trials, as well as population studies, as well as animal studies, all the way across the boards. Prospective cohorts, meta-analysis, all show the same thing, and it's now a known, which is methionine restriction increases lifespan in humans and everyone else. But this is an also important part because cancers is quickly catching up to heart attacks as one of the top killers of human beings. And methionine feeds cancer cell growth. Methionine stimulates the multiplication of cancer cells. So we now even have a term for it. It's called the Hoffman effect. Dr. Hoffman identified this, and now it's known that you can actually take the methionine out, take any cancer, put it in a petri dish, and remove all the methionine, and the cancer cells will shrink and die. So they call it now methionine, what is it called? Methionine dependency of cancer. So cancer cells are dependent on methionine. So animal proteins are generally, with the exception of nuts, so don't eat a whole lot of nuts, keep it to a minimum. Methionine is much higher in meat, dairy, and eggs, and even fish. Fish is actually one of the highest in methionine. So you want to limit that if you're doing it. So at first they said it was calories, which is true, but it was more the protein calories, which is true, but it was more the animal protein calories, which is true. And now we've identified even the specific amino acids that are in the animal proteins that are causing that. So we've come through this whole process of longevity. So I am not convinced that consuming a decent amount of plant protein with all of its phytonutrients, all of its antioxidants, its naturally occurring essential fatty acids, omega-3s and 6s that we need. These things are promoting longevity. Well, so would the protein naturally if we were eating them too. I am less concerned about high consumption of plant protein. I am much, much more concerned about people consuming high amounts of animal protein. And that is borne out in the research. We know the mechanisms of action. We know how it does it. And it's shown in the large million-person studies that the incidence is much higher.
If somebody's on a vegan diet or a raw food diet and they feel they're not getting enough protein, which they can get on a vegan and raw food diet, well, the supplementation comes into the question. And traditionally, from a vegan standpoint, you had soy supplementation or pea protein supplementation, the pea protein isolates. I'd like your opinion of both of those. And now you have a new protein supplement that's out. So can you tell us why, how, and the difference between these three? And is it necessary for everyone? If you are so answer that before we close here.
Yeah, a great question too. So a lot of people consume protein powders. One, because think they're not getting enough protein, which I think is just probably not the case for the vast majority of people. But two, for convenience. Sometimes you don't have time to cook a whole meal or to prepare a whole meal, and just getting a protein shake in. The problem with protein shakes, both whey protein and pea and rice and soy proteins, is they're isolated. They're not whole foods. So they're stripped of their fiber, they're stripped of their micronutrients, they're stripped of their polyphenols. They take everything out just to leave the protein so that you get mostly protein. Highly processed and not as good for you because they're not in their whole food state. So I was like, well, geez, there's got to be a better way to do this. There's got to be a whole food.
Won't that weigh out the difference, even though they're isolated and they're processed? Is that still less dangerous than not having what you can't seem to be getting from food if somebody is in that position?
So there are some people that, like elderly people, who just they just don't have the appetite. A lot of people, when they get 60s, 70s, 80s, they just don't have as much appetite and can't get in more than 14 or 1500 calories in a day. So your percentage of protein has to go up in order to meet your real protein needs. So there are good reasons for that. There are people that are on calorie restriction and want a way to get in protein calories without all the fat, without all the excess calories that come with the rest of the whole foods. So there are definitely good reasons why people should or may want to consider or could benefit from it.